Hi, everyone. I'm Regina Harmon. I'm the Executive Director of Food Recovery Network. I am so excited to continue having conversations with our incredible Food Recovery Network alums. And today we are in for a special treat. I am so excited to have a conversation with Priscilla. This is actually an ongoing conversation. I've had the pleasure of talking with Priscilla on many occasions. And what is so special about this time around is that all of you get to hear more from Priscilla and her perspectives, her experience. And I'm just really so excited to dig in. But to start off, Priscilla, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Regina and Food Recovery Network, for having me. I'm Priscilla, she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Oceti lands, also known as Minnesota, United States. And I was a former FRN member at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus.
Amazing. And thank you for that. To let us know on whose land you are on in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. I also want to say that I'm on the Piscataway Conoy tribal land, and I actually just learned to continue on. It's wonderful to do our land acknowledgements, and for me behind that, and I think also I can say this safely with Priscilla behind that is lived experience, but then also continuous learning. I just learned the Piscataway Conoy. That's two different words that were connected together by the Iroquois, who, when the Piscataway, their numbers were dwindling, for all the reasons that we know, connected in with another group, and the Iroquois actually were the ones that gave them the name Piscataway Conoy. So,
Wow.
thank you, Priscilla, for being so kind to remind us of on whose land we all are inhabiting in this peaceful and gentle way. Thank you for introducing yourself and your background with Food Recovery Network. So can you tell us a little bit more about your time with your chapter at the University of Minnesota?
Absolutely. It's one of the highlights of my college experience. So I graduated my undergrad degree 3 years ago in 2022, and I was involved with Food Recovery Network since day one. I started my first year of undergrad and moved from a member to an officer to the club president, and then graduated and was able to hand it off. And it was amazing for me because I went into college not really sure what I wanted to do. I felt like in high school, when we think about you got to make money, you have to pursue STEM. And then STEM was just physics, bio, chemistry. I had no idea about food science, ecology, environmental science until later on in high school. And that completely opened the world of food and politics. And so I came to the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, to study sustainable food systems. And FRN happened to be one of the clubs that I saw on the bridge. On our campus, we have this giant bridge spanning the Mississippi River, and there's little panels within the bridge that clubs could paint their little advertisement on. And I saw FRN and I thought, wow, this speaks to me because food waste seems like such an avoidable issue, especially in today's modern, I wouldn't even say modern, industrialized world. I think we all understand that it's not a scarcity issue, but it's more a distribution issue. So for me, food recovery just felt like such an easy entry point into supporting my community. So it's always been a small but mighty team at the University of Minnesota. When I joined, it was maybe me and two or three other people running it. And then when my friends graduated, it was sometimes me and just my brother who I kind of forced to join with me because we share a car. But we grew, right? It was myself and a couple others, and we forged a lot of relationships and continue to do that on campus. And I can talk a little bit more later about the coalition building we did around FRN.
What a fantastic background. Thank you so much, Priscilla. I love that. And a lot of our chapters, just as you have said, all over the United States have seen that at their joining point where, maybe they were one of two or maybe one of several, and then graduation happens and there is this, movement within the movement, this fluctuation that can happen. Um, and so and I love this imagery of this bridge spanning across the Mississippi River, so historic, so iconic. And this one little, you just happen to see this thing, this small sign. that spoke to you. That is just so beautiful. And there's so many signs around us. You saw that sign and you acted on it. Um, and thank you for bringing your brother along on the journey.
Yes.
How's your brother these days? Is he still part of FRN? Has he graduated?
He's graduated. He's 2 years younger and he studied human resources. So he was happy to tag along with his sister and just like help deliver food recoveries, but he never became a formal member. So, but he's doing
That's
well. He's
amazing.
graduated,
That's
working.
great. So wonderful. I love it, siblings doing things together.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so I just wondered if you don't mind talking a little bit about, you did mention the coalition building and you mentioned, the different numbers that were part of your FRN chapter. You and I have spoken about this word, this activity, this action, coalition building. Do you mind just giving us some thoughts from your perspective on this idea of coalition building when you saw it happening for your FRN chapter, some of the results, just all things coalition building for us.
That's a wonderful question. And I think it has to really, you have to really look at the arc of food recovery to food sovereignty, is how I personally journeyed through it. Food recovery, I find to be a great entry point in terms of talking to other students, and whether it's recruiting or just getting to know someone, feeding people is a feel-good thing. And when you dig into it a little bit more, especially in the school campus system, higher education is a complex ecosystem. And through food recovery, I got to literally peek behind the door because you go and you get your food from the cafeteria and you never get to see what's going on in the kitchen, right? But when you are a part of FRN, you have to go into the kitchens. You get to talk to these workers, oftentimes immigrant workers, union workers, people from all over the world who might not even speak English. And it really allows you to transcend some of those silos that often take place in academia, whether it's by major, department, college, interest, right? And when you get to peek into the kitchen, you also get a peek into administration, how the admin handles food contracts, because on our campus, at least, you had to get permission from the student union club, and they had to liaison with the kitchen. And many times on campus, especially in the United States, food dining halls on universities are governed by what we call big food or big ag, right? The main three, you might have seen the trucks, Aramark, Sodexo, Bon Appetit. Those folks have a monopoly on campuses. And it's not just campuses, it's prisons, hospitals, stadiums. And while I was a part of Food Recovery Network, I was also involved with Uprooted and Rising, whose parent company is Real Food Generation, and it's gone through rebranding and such. But Real Food Generation put out a wonderful report talking about the complex systems of food dining halls. And so, in my role while I was doing food recoveries, I was also grappling with the politics of food access and how our universities enable market inequities within local markets, right? Why are we not sourcing from local farmers? Why are we sourcing through this conglomerate that ships food all across the nation in very extractive ways that lock out smaller players? And when I started digging into this, it also brought me closer to other movements on campus, right? Environmental justice, climate action, political groups like YDSA or and folks like that. And the more we talked about these issues that we were all campaigning for, especially on a campus with, for example, limited funding to give to clubs, we started to ask each other, why are we competing for the same pool of money and why are we all working in our own little clubs expending our energy having these disparate campaigns to communicate and rally support. So the coalition building really, for me, peaked during the beginnings of COVID when a lot of organizing became virtual. And in some ways, it was great because you could just hop on Signal and message 250 people instead of going hall to hall and trying to bulletin board everything, right? So it brought us closer together in many ways in the online world. And of course, 2020 also saw in Minnesota George Floyd and this resurgence of mainstream rhetoric, putting into the limelight, you know, autonomy, social justice, and food sovereignty, because many dining halls are like the main source of food for students, and many universities live within food deserts. So it was this coalescing of different topics that just felt very prime for food recovery to step in because we were one of the few people allowed in the kitchens. You can't come into the kitchen if you're campaigning for Earth Day, right? So I felt like FRN really tried to have a big umbrella because not everyone who just wants to do good is super involved in the politics of everyday activism, but it was a big enough tent where it attracted people to do good while also gaining political education and getting this connection to other movements on campus. So I felt like FRN was a true privilege because I not only got to feed my community, divert waste from landfills, but also gain this deeper sense of belonging on campus and how my little world fit into that bigger world. So it was a great arc getting to learn more about food sovereignty through food recovery.
Thank you so much for that offering. I just, there's so many incredible things that you've said that I am just, and I'm being brought back into when you said, it was 2022 when you got involved or when you graduated. So I was immediately like, oh yes, COVID, and it's still so present in our lives. In 2020 with George Floyd, we just had an anniversary of his murder not too long ago, and this idea of with the coalition building and some of the gems that COVID did offer to us in terms of being able to be in touch with so many people, as you said, all at once, and really connect with people who are looking for things. And I really appreciate, Priscilla, you talking about how big the tent is, that Food Recovery Network. We really do try to have that big tent to welcome in folks, because your brother came because you asked him. He might not be so aware of, or other people, they come because they are asked, or they come because you know feeding people is important, but then they get connected to the environmental piece, or the environmental piece is really important to them, and then they see like, oh my gosh, I'm now meeting the shift workers who are making my food, that, oh, by the way, high percentages of those people who make our food at the higher education level, at the hospital level, at the prison level, the convention center level, when COVID hit, they lost their jobs.
Mhm.
Though we saw, food prices increase, we saw, the access, the need for food never went away.
Yep.
And so the profit went up, but how we treated people became quite, I think, really was illuminated for some people who didn't necessarily see that all the time.
Hmm.
So I wondered, Priscilla, so you came to the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, you got involved, you already had this, understanding around, food sovereignty. You're seeing these contracts, you're behind the curtain, as you said. um, you're seeing smaller, farmers being pushed out for um, easier food access, larger quantities of food access. I just wondered, were you ever able to speak to that, to the powers that be at the University of Minnesota? What were those conversations like? Because and I ask that because a lot of times just the simple act of being able to recover food and bring it off campus or bring it to other places on campus, that often is a really big conversation, a direct conversation that young people have with adults. And a lot of times things have changed over time for sure, but a lot of times that first conversation was no. And if you don't necessarily have the resiliency and the tenacity, a friend can help build that. But a lot of times people are just like, oh, I can't. But so I just wondered if, what came from seeing all of that for you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question to think about food access, not just from getting the food, but bringing it elsewhere. There's so much red tape around just feeding people, right? And I think those of us in the spaces of justice work and care work understand that it's hard to do a good thing sometimes. And yes, our chapter did have a chance to speak to the higher ups, speak to admin, come to Board of Regent meetings. And this was made possible through group teamwork. If it weren't for another member who understood what a FOIA was, which is just like a request for the public to see documents. When you go to a place like a University of Minnesota, which is a land grant university, it's
Mhm.
a public university. It belongs to the state. So you, as a citizen, have a right to request access to documentation. So, for example, when I was almost graduating, that was the year the contract with Aramark was expiring, and the university was debating whether to renew that contract and lock ourselves in for another 10 years at fixed prices for a food dining contract, or we had a chance to pursue alternatives. And so that was an amazing little bit of a window for us to kind of agitate and really push for alternative food sourcing contracts. We were not successful, but we learned so much through navigating the food systems on campus, who to talk to, why were some people not able to say things, why were folks trying to kind of skirt around the issue. And this was a great year for organizing with other coalitions and other movements on campus because, of course, when a dining contract is enacted, you're locked in for 10 years, and that company basically comes in and owns the kitchen. It doesn't belong to the university anymore. That kitchen now belongs to that company that's providing the food. And so they have control over worker wages, union rights, all of that. So it's a big, big ripple effect. And like you said, Regina, it's all about systems thinking. It's about seeing how these interlocking pieces work together that either move us forward or set us back. So we, through combing apart the contract, technical writing is a lot. But it was amazing that sometimes we would have like food recovery network folks show up to meetings with Uproot and Rising folks, and we would just sit there and we would say, okay, you take pages 1 through 10, we'll take pages 11 through 20, and just divvy up those giant documents detailing what it is that's within our rights, what's the contract, what are they proposing, and taking that and then translating it into social media posts was where we saw a lot of success. We want students to understand exactly what's happening, not in a oversimplified, sensationalist way, but truly taking out snippets of the contract, screenshotting it. And I think, the power of media was amazing. Did the algorithm always favor us? No, but that's what I mean by having a coalition is that your little Instagram might not have that many followers, but other clubs can repost it. And so we also got a chance to talk to folks at Aramark when they were trying to move in. They had a sustainability director, and I could tell sometimes that there was tension even internally, morally, right? What could they say to students? What couldn't they say? Um, is it really sustainable, even though that's my job title? I remember one of the most it was kind of funny, but not funny moment where they were having a student public hearing forum to understand what students' needs were before Aramark's contract got signed. And we took that as a chance to do some direct action. We flooded the Zoom and the Zoom chat. It was a webinar, so we couldn't come off mute, but we were spamming the question, the Q&A chat, and be like, okay, you say you do local sourcing. What does local mean to you? What percentage of these farmers are smallholder farmers? What percentage are BIPOC? What percentage are women owned? And the more pressure we added, we got the answers that we were expecting. At the end of the day, they were not sourcing local, and the only woman-owned business they were supporting were Staples. They were supporting like a stationery company
Mhm.
or getting staples for their office, right? So nothing to do with food. So that peeling back of the layers and understanding the bureaucracy of it all was really enlightening. And we came to Board of Regents meetings with demands for union workers, for the food contract. But, sometimes when you live in a state like the Midwest, there's also a lot of pressures from big ag. We have Hormel here, we have Cargill and companies like that that have a lot of power. And this is not to say that all corporations are here to destroy universities, but I think it really got us to appreciate the complexity of it all and how relationships work and how to exercise our messaging. Maybe it didn't work this time with this social media post. How can we word it a little bit differently to make it as accessible as possible? So that was a whole journey over 2 years. And at the end of it, we came away with more relationships and a greater appreciation, I think, across the board for how to build solidarity and like true solidarity, not because turnover is very high, as you know, people graduate every 2 to 4 years. And so it was a chance to pause and also address things like decoloniality and what does it mean to be an ally. And so that was also a great learning experience.
So incredible, Priscilla. I didn't know a lot of that, that particular part of your journey. And 3 years out of graduating, how clearly you can still recall those moments of what that was like. Because I do think a lot of times, we want to be part of communities, we want to do good, we want to be involved, and then in the doing of it, we're like, is this it? Is this coalition building? Is this allyship? Am I being a good person? And it is from the loving reverberations of the groups that you're working with that let you are needed, and your voice matters, and your actions are making results. And I really appreciate what you were telling us and describing that, and I was immediately thinking of Martin Luther King Jr. when he has his speech from the mountaintop, where he says, pretty much at the very beginning, like, I might not get there with you, but
Hmm.
this vision that we have, and we might not get a contract that reflects our values. We might not, but in the doing of the work, you learned so much, including, I wonder, when you were talking about technical writing or creating social media posts, there's so many different actions that were taken from this experience, Priscilla. Plus, you're here and you were in academia. Um, did these ways that you showed up for your community and all the learnings, to be an activist and to be, an academic, did that help you determine at what altitude, you wanted to continue to pursue your abilities to make change?
Yes, we are all constrained by the 24 hours in a day. And I had to
Yeah.
have some very tough conversations with myself of not being Delulu and not trying to take on everything. We we definitely have moments in academia where you're trying to just survive, be a student, be a part-time worker, be a student club member. There's just so many roles we wear while being a student, and I think that was definitely a conversation we had towards the end when I was starting to graduate and trying to hand off the club. It was only me and maybe two other folks, and we had to think about the viability of this model and the sustainability of the club. And I think what really pulled us through was, like, again, the exposure I talked about by partnering with the student newspaper who had journalists, so we didn't have to do the writing, really leveraging people's strengths, especially in a student world where capacity is constrained, resources are constrained. I think it's easy to fall into the trap of we need to do this, we need to do that, but really stepping back and seeing what assets already exist in our ecosystem really alleviates some of the pressure. So through the student newspaper, through other clubs, we tried to recruit a little bit more. We had more events with food, right? The little funding that we did have, we tried to use food to attract folks, and that always worked a little bit better. And the altitudes in which we worked, I found myself going to rallies more and just talking to people on the sidelines. I didn't always have the microphone, but that's okay. You can connect with people on a human relational level. I also really appreciated the towards the end the intergenerational aspects of our coalition building. Like, for example, talking to the union workers and the kitchen workers. Some are recently graduated and they're working in the kitchen until their next job. Some folks are there and they've been there for like 30 years working as a line cook. And so hearing their perspective and their wisdom of what they've seen over the years and the changes they've seen kind of reassures you that it's okay to not be doing everything with a lot of urgency all the time. That change is patient, change is slow, but I also try to remind myself that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And so thinking at the micro level, continuing a club like FRN, even if it's just 2 to 5 people every year that are running it, I still think that makes a big difference because even with a small team like that, we still manage to divert like 6,000 or more pounds a year, and that is no small feat. So I think taking time to celebrate the wins too was important, while trying to balance, activism and academics and just being alive, really trying to pause and say, wow, we did not have to do this. This is something we took upon ourselves, right? So trying not to be too difficult on oneself because every bit matters. And I think that message is really seeping in to the movements now of how, rest is resistance, joy. We can't just focus on the negatives, right? How are we also amplifying the joy that exists in this work? So caring for each other and caring for other clubs really made a difference.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Um, it's so true, and you're just reminding me, as um of a few things, for one, for me, like someone who's been doing this work, you know, for and with FRN for a decade now, um, you do want to see reflected back to you, at least, in these larger community, what we call the United States, reflected back that we care enough about each other that we're not going to let people go hungry. And the fact that we're all born into something that's not inevitable, that is reflecting to us to say, no, actually, we're really not gonna do that, can be difficult. And I often write about, those feelings of being overwhelmed. But as you said, Priscilla, to just take those moments of pause and to celebrate. And even when in hard times throughout history, in our current present moment, in immediate hard moments, people are celebrating, they're joking around, they're sharing, they're smiling. So that's for me, just as thank you for that reminder that and I often talk about it too, like you said, a couple of people every year maintaining a food recovery network chapter. By the time, we collectively turn around, it's 6,000 pounds of food, it's 12,000, it's people going to grab bagels every Saturday together, getting 4 bagels and donating those 4 bagels. It is the actions, that tell us we want to be in a world that really honors every living being. So thank you for that. My dogs are chiming
Yes.
in. Thank you, Roy. Okay. So, and maybe let me pause here real quick, Priscilla, because I think Bella will be able to edit this part out because he's a puppy. So he's just like, he may keep going. He may keep going. So I'll be right back.
Take your time.
So Priscilla, I wanted to ask you, and you've really touched on this, throughout our conversation together, your encouragement that you had for your chapter and why you started, why you continued on with your chapter, and what you're seeing, now that you are graduated. I was wondering, what would you say to encourage other, students to start a food recovery network chapter?
I think one of the easiest ways to start a food recovery chapter is to make friends who like eating. I think when we think about what makes the world go around, it's food. Everyone says it's money, but no, it's food. You can't have an economy on hungry stomachs. So I think food as the basis was a great entry point for starting conversations. And what's nice about the club is you don't need a ton of money to run it, right? We had some printing costs to do posters and a banner, and we always try to maintain some money for gas reimbursements. But the cost and infrastructure for running food recovery really lies, I think, in the digital world and with our social capital. So the entry the bar is low, in my opinion, for starting Food Recovery Network. And the amazing parent organization has a robust infrastructure to support chapters. I love the portal for student chapters, the check-ins, the amazing newsletters. I think one of the scary things about starting anything new is that I have to do this by myself, and that's so not true when it comes to the Food Recovery Network. There's a national organization backing everything up, and then when you graduate, they send you a little care package. So how sweet is that? I love the culture here. It's very opening and inviting. And for me, one of the barriers and challenges of doing food recovery now was car access.
Mm,
Luckily, I commuted all 4 years of college. I took the bus from my parents' house to campus, and then when COVID happened and there were bus times being cut, we started driving. And so having a car on campus helps immensely with recoveries. Now, even if none of your club members have a car, some campuses offer car share programs where you can rent a car for a certain amount of time and use that too. I know other campuses use bikes, and so that's one of the challenges that you might have the entryway to get the food. They might allow you to take the food off campus, but then how are you transporting it to your drop-off site? And we had a place that we went to consistently, and then there were changes, and they said we can no longer accept, we're at capacity, we can't accept any more food. And we're like, oh, what do we do? And where do we put it that's close to campus because we don't want folks driving too far or biking heavy loads. So we pivoted and started dropping it off at an organization called People Serving People, and it's a shelter for our unhoused community members. And their kitchen and their freezer space was a tenth of the usual warehouse we went to, but they were so grateful to receive this donation. They had never heard of us. And so I thought that was another amazing bridge that was built to a local business that was supporting unhoused folks, and lots of kids looked forward to our recovery drop off because they don't get Panda Express otherwise, right? So
right, yeah.
it was definitely a bright spot for us and a bright spot for them. And just a different environment. Dropping food off at a warehouse on the dock is a completely different experience than walking into an office with like five security officers and metal detectors just to drop off food, right? And so seeing the different ways our communities were structured and how social services interacted was a great thing as well. So
Mhm.
for future clubs, get started, make sure you have access to transport heavy stuff and make sure to use your knees. I had to learn the hard way.
Lift with your legs.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that is so incredible, Priscilla, and thank you for that encouragement to folks who are, in higher ed who might be looking for ways to get involved. And I'm so excited for, everyone to hear your words and your encouragement. And, you remind me of, in fact, at headquarters, here in Washington, D.C., just as you described, Priscilla. So at national office, like, yes, we have resources for our chapters, for beginning chapters. We have reimbursement for expenses, all of those wonderful things. And we are out recovering as well in our community, which happens to be, the DMV, so the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. So we at the national office, we all go out and we participate in food recovery. And we've had for the last several years, going on 4 years now, consistent food recovery with the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center. And we would bring that food to Central Union Mission in DC. And just like what happened with you, Priscilla, they happened to tell they were not necessarily at capacity, but they could accept large volumes of food. And they said, hey, we know about some other nonprofits in the area. Would you be able to maybe provide some of the trays of food to them? And because they opened up that conversation with us and we said, absolutely, we now have, two different routes that we take to ensure food. It's, 6 trays of food, 10 trays of food that goes to all of these other smaller locations where the food is so vital, and it is increasing that access, that flow of food to these places. So, just to reflect, what you saw in your experience of being able to now go from one location to two. That happens so often with our chapters, and it's just such an incredible moment when we are able to do that. I know with, bringing it back to COVID, some of the locations where we would bring our food, they shuttered and it became permanent. And so some of our chapters had to look for new places to bring food, and it did just expand, what we know of our lived space. Because sometimes, depending on where people go to school, they live on campus all 4 years. They take, it can become a very small radius of an experience. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I wondered, so that your advice, for folks who might be interested in starting a chapter, I wondered, first if you have any thoughts on, additional thoughts that came from that and my addition that, and then also, if there's maybe a story, you've told so many really wonderful stories, but if there's like another story you might want to offer to all of us that comes to mind when you reflect on your time with your FRN chapter.
There are so many stories and so many shiny testimonials that have come out of this program from all over the states. I think I want to take a moment to celebrate the mundane. When trying to build community, I think oftentimes we are so busy doing the work that we don't take a moment to handle the operations. And that's so critical to making sure this work continues. And so for future chapters and current chapters, I really want to underscore the need for documentation. Document all your relationships, contact information. What's the processes for putting on gloves and bagging food? What's the processes for dropping off food? How does this business like their food dropped off? How does this business like their food dropped off? That type of organized documentation will go such a long way when trying to hand off clubs and while trying to initiate new members. I know I definitely didn't have a chance to practice facilitating meetings as much until I started getting involved with FRN and other involvements. Just learning how to run efficient meetings so people show up and leave feeling like their time wasn't wasted, and understand their roles. You're the driver, you're the picker upper, you're the person who logs it for FRN so that National doesn't have to email us to input our little metrics at the end of the year, you know? So celebrating just the hard work behind the scenes that it takes to run something like this and celebrating how you start understanding ways to be in relation to one another. I think oftentimes, especially in the winters of Minnesota, you're all bundled up, you're trying to move as fast as you can between the building and your car, and it's cold. But I think really this work at the end of the day is it's a little bit more than just recovering food for me. It was really about tending to each other's humans and tending to the earth and tending to myself. Was this work nourishing? Was it fulfilling all the things that were important to me and also things around me? So, and the ways that the clubs interacted with each other. So, for me, it was really the stories of meeting the people on the shipping docks and in the kitchen. But yeah, just the relationality of it all. I can't stress enough. And that relationality makes doing boring things like Google Docs organization even more fun because you like the people you're doing it with. So, yeah,
I love
those are my two
that.
big things.
Oh, thank you for that. And as we um come to the conclusion of our time together for now, for this
Mhm.
specific conversation, we'll keep them going. I wondered, so you said you graduated a few years ago, and so what are you working on now, work-wise, or just, things that are singing to you in this world? What's on your plate these days?
What's on my plate? Too many things, but I'm privileged to say that the things that are on my plate, I find lots of joy doing. And so, like I said, I studied sustainable food systems, but I do work in communications. I don't have a comms degree, but of course, they're doing things like FRN and just getting into the work world. It's always like, well, you're the youngest person in the room. Handle our social media, right? So, and I'm not mad about it because I've always loved writing. I've always loved being the communicator because science and all its glory will not be of much benefit to the public if no one's translating that into action, right? And so I spend my time working in food and ag nonprofit spaces now. My day job, my role is communications manager for a 501c based in North Carolina. and we do financial literacy for BIPOC farmers, land stewards, forest owners, underserved communities, and we work with impact investors. So people with capital who want to do good with capital and connecting them to on the ground places that need that capital to really magnify regenerative, scalable agriculture and practices. So, uplifting community wealth building is what we do at my work. And then I also volunteer as director of communications for another nonprofit that does international post-capitalism organizing. So, exploring what does a world beyond capitalism feel like, look like, and then how do we do it? And that's international. So, I have the amazing chance to work with people in the States and also across the world. And then when I'm not working from 9 to 5 and then 5 to 9, I love being in my garden. My garden that I tend to with my partner brings me a lot of joy, gets my hand in the dirt, and it's pretty rewarding because I think growing up, it was always seen like being outdoorsy was a white people thing. Like we didn't have the money to do camping gear, right? We didn't know what REI was.
Mhm,
We thought
mhm,
that that's something other people do. But then
mhm.
as I got older, I got a job and I felt like, oh yeah, I can finally now invest in these hobbies that weren't seen as inherently something that people that looked like me did. But I think it's also ironic because I remember when I told my parents I want to go to the College of Food and Agriculture, they were like, we literally crossed the Pacific Ocean to avoid rice paddies, and now you want to go back into food? Oh my God, what are we gonna tell your grandma? And I just told them, like, you tell grandma that as long as people eat, I'll have a job. There's no shortage of food jobs. And it's not just what happens in the field on the farm. Food is health, food is economics, food is medicine. It's so many things. And so now that I'm coming a little bit more full circle back to being in my garden, I think that being in relationship with your food is something that transcends generations and lived experiences, and it's very grounding for me. And I'm still learning lots. I started with pots and now I'm on a plot of land. So yeah, baby steps.
I love it. I love that, Priscilla. And again, just if everyone listening in, if there are terms or ideas that Priscilla has put forward that maybe sounds familiar or sounds, I've never heard this before, let us know because we want to know what is of interest to you when we have these conversations because we can continue conversations, we can expound upon conversations, we can provide resources to folks that want to learn more. Because I do think with Food Recovery Network, when we put forward, again, back to the COVID times, we just happened to be working on our strategic framework, FRN 10X. And that was, how could we grow the movement of Food Recovery Network, but also really being very intentional in articulating what we're trying to do. So we're working to recover surplus food to feed everyone who's hungry in the United States. And when we think about who's hungry and why, um, we use the Annie EKC framework that says no matter what problem you are trying to solve, that you must mitigate and close ethnic and racial disparities because of the system of racism in the United States, so that our communities, our BIPOC communities, are most often the ones that are suffering from fill in the blank, for us, food insecurity, more often than white counterpart communities. And we need to investigate and look at why that is and why it's perpetuating. And Priscilla, you mentioned, just being in these spaces that, often is spaces that have been normalized as white spaces. I too have gone on that journey, down the REI route, was part of a bicycling community to get more Black and brown bodies out into biking lanes and just being part of that because it was so often systematically denied, to people of color. And, for me with the, having the garden plots, another thing that really for me resonates because I grew up in a working poor family, mixed race family, and we had a garden. And for me, I very much equated that having the garden with like, we are growing food because we can't afford to buy food. And I too had, that and that was true. That just happened to be the case.
Yep.
But having that full circle moment of I feel so connected to my earth. I feel so connected to my ancestors. I feel so powerful when I can grow food. And I know that this is going to be healthy for me and for my family and my friends and, all those things. So I really just appreciate how much of your lived experience you have woven into this conversation today. I know that I want to keep hearing and learning more, and I want to hear, for what your parents are thinking about your career and your the passions that you have and how you spend your time and what your grandma has to say about that. Um, it is just it's all just so important. And I talk often about people widening their aperture of understanding. The more we talk to people who have different experiences from us, the more we do that intergenerational conversations, we just learn more from one another. So I just thank you so much for bringing so much of that, so many different threads into this beautiful fabric that you've woven within this conversation today.
Thank you, Regina. It was a pleasure to share and always love being in dialogue with you and seeing how FRN really touches people in such different ways. So grateful for the work you do and the whole FRN team for doing because it does make a big difference.
Thank you. Stay tuned for more conversations, everyone. And for now, just thank you, Priscilla, for this really wonderful time together. Thank you.